Hi there, you're listening to the Estranged Heart podcast, and I'm your host, Kreed Revere. Welcome back to our returning listeners, and if this is your first time here, thank you for selecting this podcast to listen to. As we begin today's episode, I invite you to grab a cup of coffee or tea, settle in, and listen with an open heart. But first, the regular disclaimer. I am not a licensed therapist or counselor. Nothing within this podcast should be considered or taken as therapy. If you are in need of therapeutic support such as counseling, please seek out a therapist near you. Today's episode came about by way of a training that I attended recently on implicit bias. And the title of the episode today is, But That's Not What I Meant. How to Bridge the Intent versus Impact Gap. So this training I was at, as I listened, and when I heard the speaker make mention of intention versus the impact of words spoken, I mean, the training I was in had nothing to do with estrangement, and I immediately thought, "Oh my gosh, this has everything to do with estrangement." Um, while I've never put it in these terms, this is basically what I try to communicate with parents when I am coaching them through this podcast and what have you, is that while our intentions may have been good and for the best interest of our kids, to keep them safe and free from harm and all of those things, the impact was often very different. And for most of us, and I include myself in this, we go through life without really recognizing the impact of our actions and words. This is um, really has a lot to do with when I talk about moving from a manager into the role of a consultant with our adult children. This is why. Because while you can have the best of intentions, the way it's received can be anything but that. So I had a couple of quotes for today. The first one: understanding the difference between intent and impact is critical. It can quite literally be the difference between suffering and love. And that is by Vienna Ferron. The second one: the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. And that is by George Bernard Shaw. And let me repeat that one. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place, meaning that communication has taken place. So, have you ever, some of you may have heard of this, may have not, but it's been kind of common in my world and dealing and interacting with younger adults, particularly at work. But I've, I oftentimes have heard those folks, as well as my own adult children, say, ah, check yourself, right? And some of us, while that can be said for a variety of reasons and in a variety of settings, um, I think it can apply here. And basically what that means is stop centering your experience and identity in the conversation by making this about the intent of your actions instead of their impact. Actions or words, right? So I'll give an example. I believe I've talked about this before on the podcast. Maybe I have not. Maybe it was in a support group. But my parents last year remarried, and I was there was a plan for me to go and officiate the ceremony. I was not able to do so. And my parents, to my knowledge, again, I live 3,000 miles away from my parents. Um, to my knowledge, were just going to go to the, courthouse, justice of the peace, and not have any family or friends attend the wedding. It just wasn't a huge thing for them, or so I was told. And I have a sibling that lives in Florida, lives relatively close to my parents, and I was told that she would not be there either. That she had work and other things going on in her life, and this was going to happen on a Friday afternoon. And so that afternoon, that day of the wedding, I got a text from my sister that said, "Well, our parents are married." And I replied back with, "Woohoo, congratulations to mom and dad. So happy for them." And the next text that came through was a photo taken up at the wedding of my parents saying their vows, and my sister was standing up for my mom. And I was quite heartbroken over that. And then, so after that, I called my mom and spoke to my mom and my dad to congratulate them. That I was happy for them, what have you. Asked them what their plans were for the rest of the day, and my mom said, "Well, we're going out for lunch. We're all going to go celebrate with the pastor and his wife, and just have a meal together." I said, "Okay, that's fantastic." So they went and had lunch. I called my mom a little while later to ask how the luncheon went and to check on something else. And anyway, when I had her on the phone, I said, "Well, how was the lunch?" And she said, "Oh, it was absolutely fantastic. It was so great. We had everyone there that really means anything, that means so much to us." And I know that my mother's words, that her intentions were to simply convey how happy she was. But the impact of those words, it was like a sucker punch to me. She had basically, from my perspective, told me that everyone who meant something to her was present at that wedding, and I was not. I was not there. So I took that to mean that I wasn't up there on the list of people who matter to her. Um, at no point did she say anything along the lines of, "Oh my gosh, we missed you. We so wish you could have been here with us. There was a part of our family missing that day." Like there was none of that. And so this is what it means to be cognizant of your intentions versus your impact. Your words and your actions impact people. And even though you have the best of intentions, it doesn't always land that way with the other person. And so if we're talking about parents and adult children, this is really significant, especially if there's been any sort of sibling rivalry where one child says, "Oh, you love so and so more than you love me," or "Yeah, she's always your favorite," or "Oh, yeah, he's always your favorite and I'm never considered," or "You do more for that one than you do for me," or things along those lines. Your words can absolutely, well, as our quote said earlier today, they can be the difference between suffering and love. And I think that just sums it all up. So that was a little bit of a backstory on what I wanted to give you as an example of just how powerful the impact can be on people. That one comment from my mother that day sent me reeling for many days. And on some level, it still affects me today. And there's never been anything said since then about the fact that I wasn't present on that very special day for them, right? So, again, you can have the best of intentions. Your intent can be to not harm or cause someone any suffering or any of those things, and it still can happen. So, let's break this down. What is intent? Intent is the idea or desire behind an action. It's what you had in mind or what you were hoping to achieve with a particular way of acting or speaking. And an impact is the effect an action or words has on a person or a community. Although you might desire a specific outcome, the outcome that occurs might not be what you had in mind. Okay. So, what are some obstacles to this, right? Well, I think the biggest one is our own perceptions, right? Um, I hear parents say on occasion, "Oh my God, that was something so small. Why are they making it such a big deal? I mean, really, come on. That's they know that's not what I meant." And I am here to tell you they don't know because they're not in your head. They're not knowing what your thoughts are. They're not mind readers, right? Same thing with them. So adult children, your parents aren't your mind readers. They cannot know what your intent is unless you specifically are very clear in communicating that. So our own perspectives, our centering ourselves in this, but that's not what I meant. That's about us, right? How many times do we stop and say, "Oh my gosh, what was that? I'm so sorry. What was that like for you? It wasn't my intention, but I want to learn what the impact it was for you." I know I didn't say that as a parent. I try to do that now. I try to be very mindful of the words that I say and wondering what the impact will be before I ever open my mouth. But there again, right? They can't read my mind. So we have to be clear in stating intentions. And one way, and I know that the parents go, "Well, am I supposed to say, so I'm going to do A, B, C, and D, and my intention with that is A, B, C, and D, and this is in my, I'm not intending A, B, C, and no, that's not what I'm talking about." But one of the things that I do with my adult children now is that I ask before I assume anything. The triple A's. Ask before assuming about anything, right? So, how do we do that, right? Well, an example. Um, if you were to, and this is, I see this all the time, as I think most of us do on some level, if you're in any type of support group or what have you, is that the intent when we send letters and cards and things to our kids and we then either get a nasty gram back or we don't get any response or what have you. The intent is I want them to know that I love them and I care about them and I haven't forgotten about them. And the impact of receiving that can have the opposite effect. It can be perceived as overstepping boundaries. It can be perceived as, look, there she goes again, making it all about her. That type of thing. It's all about her, what she wants. She wanted to send this email. She wanted to send this card. She wanted to send this gift. Well, what about what I want? What about what I want for my kids? Right? So we need to learn how to ask. And in asking, what is also important with that is the tone in which we ask and the level of vulnerability in which we ask, that we demonstrate when asking. So there's a difference in saying, so is it okay if I send you a card, or am I going to be, crucified for that? Versus, would you be open to me sending a card every now and then? Two very different things, right? We must learn to restrain our judgments if we're to ever close this gap on the intention impact gap. If to close it, we have to restrain that judgment. So when our kids come to us and say, your statement or your gift or your whatever made me feel blah blah blah, and we judge that with, oh my god, that's not what I meant. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. You are passing judgment in those comments. You are judging the impact that they are having. So in order to close that gap, we have to restrain from being judgmental. We have to communicate openly and with respect, regardless of what the other person is doing or not doing, right? So if you're trying to communicate and someone else is shoving back and calling you names and telling you what an idiot you are or what have you still must remain respectful. Okay. You can state what you need. You can state your intention. You can ask and be respectful, even if the other person is not. I'm not saying to stay in abusive situations. Don't get me wrong. Don't put words in my mouth. That's not what I'm saying. But you can, in the beginning, until such time as it becomes abusive, in the beginning, you can still communicate with respect. But you're going to have to be aware of your own triggers, right? Because your triggers are going to get in the way of you being respectful because you're going to react out of your triggers. And most of us, when we're triggered, are less than kind. Okay. Or we're running away or we're crying and we can't communicate and, the emotions overtake us. And we have to be accountable. This is what I talk about all the time too with parents, right? And kids, adult children who are estranged, is it's imperative that the parents take accountability. And it's about redressing the wrongs and demonstrating change behavior. Actions speak louder than words. So on occasion, I have estranged moms come to me and say, I want to write this amends letter because I want to be able to see my grandkids again. And I'm like, well, if you're writing the amends letter to solely get to your grandkids, your kid's going to know it and they're not going to receive this well. So the accountability must be sincere. It must be heartfelt because if it's not, your kid is going to know it and your kid isn't going to give you the time of day. And then you also must have changed behavior to back up the words that you've said. So if you write this beautiful amends letter and they accept that and they agree to meet with you, and they sit down to meet with you somewhere, and you roll the eyes and your body language is speaking everything but being kind and respectful and empathetic, they're going to be like, well, she hasn't changed. She just wrote this nice letter to, for what? Just to get to me, to try to get her way. So we have to take accountability. So we have to ask and be vulnerable and empathetic in our asking. We have to restrain from our judgments. We have to communicate openly and with respect. And we have to take accountability. So these are things for consideration. I invite you to think about times in your life when you've done things and it hasn't been received well, whether that's with your estranged adult children or friends and family or coworkers or what have you. One thing that comes to mind oftentimes when I think about impact versus or intention versus impact is surprise birthday parties, right? I've thrown surprise birthday parties in the past and I've received surprise birthdays parties in the past. And while it's fun and you want to celebrate this person that you love and care about by throwing a surprise birthday party, if you haven't asked them, the impact of that surprise birthday party may have devastating effects on that person. Devastating. They may feel embarrassed. They may be going through personal trials and tribulations that you are not aware of, and this may cause some sort of emotional challenge for them to keep it all together and appear to be happy and joyful and grateful that there's this party being given in their honor. They may have had, received horrific news before walking through the door that you're not aware of, right? And now they have feel this pressure to perform or, act a certain way. And if they don't act a certain way, well then, they're ungrateful and all of these horrible things that people conclusions that people jump to without knowing a full story, right? They might be introverted and really aren't the kind of person that really wants to be around a big group of people. Or they might be the opposite end of the spectrum where they're introverted, and because they're introverted, they don't have a lot of friends. And so we either invite all of our friends to this person's birthday party, surprise birthday party, or we only have a surprise birthday party with two friends and then they feel like there's something wrong with them because they only have two friends as opposed to, you know, 20, or something is said. Wow, did is this all that's coming to you tonight? Were other people invited? People say things like that and out of sincerity, but the person on the receiving end now feels like a complete idiot because they don't have more than two friends. So your words and your actions, the intention behind each of those impact people. And when we can learn to step outside of what we would want, and I see this with parents a lot, parents do things, especially when our kids are younger, and even young adults, we do things because it's what we would want or what we wanted when we were their age or what we want now that we're not getting. And so we're like, well, surely they want this too. Our subconscious mind is saying that. And the kid is like, what the hell? This is not, I don't want any of this. Right. So be mindful. I'm not telling you to walk around on eggshells all the time with everybody in your life. That's not what I'm talking about. But if we look at this through the lens of curiosity, which I talk about all the time in this podcast and in the work that I do in coaching clients, is when you develop and build your curiosity muscle, you stop acting blindly. You stop moving through life blindly and just doing crap just because, right? Because it's the norm, because it's what, it's the habit, it's what we've always done, it's what people expect, yada, yada, yada. Stop. Try to, this goes back to that platinum rule, right? Versus the golden rule. The golden rule, do unto others as you would have done to you. The platinum rule is do unto others as they would want to have done to them, right? Think about what the other person wants. We have to get out of ourself long enough to see how this could potentially impact the other person. And your kids are begging for this. They are begging for this. And I know this because I talk with estranged adult children. I coach estranged adult children. I want you to take for a second and think about yourself in the times in your life when people have said or done things and their intention may have been good and well, but the impact they had on you was the complete opposite. And then I want you to think about the times in your life when maybe you've done that to your own children, or you've done it with friends, or you've done it with a spouse, or anyone, right? So that's where I'm going to leave things for today. Really stop and think about, how can I close this gap and have my intentions align with the impact on someone else in my life? Again, get curious about that. The invitation is there. Will you accept it? This brings this episode to a close. I hope that this time together was time you feel well spent, and that you are able to find some takeaway nuggets to help you on your journey, wherever you may be on your estrangement and reconciliation path. If you feel you've received something helpful or positive from this podcast, please consider following us, sharing this podcast with others, leaving a positive review, perhaps entertaining becoming a guest on our show, or following us on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok under the same name, The Estranged Heart. As a reminder, there is an online support group on Facebook. If you are a estranged mom who identifies as being spiritual and approaches estrangement with a sense of curiosity rather than blame and judgment, and desire to do inner self-work and reflection, please seek us out. We can be found at facebook.com/estranged mothers support group. And lastly, if you are an estranged parent or an estranged adult child and would like to have your story shared on the podcast, anonymously or not, please reach out to me via email at theestrangedheart@gmail.com.